everyone, and welcome to the InBizLV Podcast, the podcast for business people, entrepreneurs, and anyone who cares about business. I'm Mark Fierro, my co-host today, Fierro Communications Vice President Jeff Haney. So every business owner knows the ups and downs of the business cycle. Landing and losing clients also have a tremendous impact on your emotions. Our guest today, Brad Garrett, not the comedian Brad Garrett, but the speaker, author, and life coach, specializes in helping people take control of their emotions, overcoming obstacles, and stopping negative reactions to developments in the world today. Welcome, Brad Garrett.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So let's hear the backstory. How did you come to this?
I started at juvenile court in 1994, and my first job was at Spring Mountain Youth Camp, working with the kids that had been detained due to adolescent delinquent behavior. And so my jobs were to conduct classes, anger management, drug classes, and to provide individual counseling. And so I started out there, and then a couple days a week, I was up there about 3 days a week, and then a couple days a week I would write court reports evaluating kids for all different types of things. Over a period of time, I was eventually moved to a probation center and provided just straight counseling at that point, working with kids. And one of the court things they wanted to have regular for these kids was anger management and stress management, as well as corrective thinking. Their thinking is what got them into trouble. It's not just the behavior, it's the thinking behind the behavior that gets you there. And so I started conducting these classes over a period of time, and I would gather new information continually that I could add and continue to refresh the classes and keep them up to date and on point. Right before I left, I came across a video called Stress Portrait of a Killer. And so since I had been doing so much on stress, I pulled this out of Netflix and watched it. It's about an hour-long video by a professor out of Stanford University. It's a National Geographic, but he is more or less the lead person in the video. And it talks about how stress literally contributes to many of the physical health problems that we're seeing today, as well as the lack of emotional control people have when they're under stress, and the problems with their behavior, the problems with health, the problems that start to develop from prolonged stress. So I put together a training for these probation officers, 250 of them in the Post Academy, Police Officer Standard Training Academy. And I put together a teaching specifically for them, because even at an early age, some of these probation officers were in their 40s and 50s and experiencing some of the health problems that develop from high levels of stress. And working in any law enforcement is a high stress profession. You have to be diligent, you have to be spot on all of the time. You're always alert. But the problem with that is if you don't know how to turn it off, then you're eventually down the road going to start to see the health problems that develop because of what the adrenaline and the cortisol does to you. So that training then, combined with all of my past training and work with kids, became the idea behind the book.
You know, you talk about reactive emotions, and
right.
In the business world, we're constantly reacting, and some of us fall in the trap of only reacting, not acting from a plan, always just reacting to the environment and the last invoice that didn't go. And,
absolutely.
And so we can live the same exact pattern. What is the saying? Nothing is but thinking makes it so. The exact same
pattern is there.
And we can go through life as tortured beings and make the exact same amount of money, or just go through as happy as a clam. One of my favorite people in the world, Rich McDonald. We were coming down the hill and we're looking at millions and millions of dollars worth of earth-moving equipment. And I said, Rich, if I had to pay for all this, I would never sleep. How do you do this? And he said, I was just figured everything was going to be okay. Same fact pattern.
No, that's a good approach, because it shows a pattern within his thinking of how he looks at all of these things. And that's really what the key is, that whatever it is that's in front of you is simply an obstacle, a challenge. It's a job that needs to get done by a certain amount of time. That's all it is. but people react to it and then allow their reactions to dictate how they're going to behave. The problem is that you don't have to constantly be reactive, because really it's just a problem that needs to be solved. And when you start to look at these things, like a time deadline, and you approach it from, okay, this is a problem, how do I then manage my time? How then do I go about making sure that I'm going to make that time deadline? That is a problem that you're solving. It's not a constant state of reaction.
I mean, we can all definitely relate to this. We all try to eat a healthy diet, go to the gym, exercise, but unless you get a handle on the stress in your life, I mean, that can be the real killer. So my question is, how important is that? And in broad terms, what steps can people take to deal with that, to counteract that? Is it different for every individual, or how does that work?
It's the same basic process, starting there. It's the same basic process for everybody. And how important is it? From what I have seen, from what I have experienced, it's very important because, as you was kind of talking earlier, you start to set a pattern in your life. And that pattern literally becomes like a roadmap in your brain. And your brain is responding in the way that you and I have trained it to respond. So all of a sudden, here comes this thing up, our brain, says, okay, here it comes, guys. We got to kick in, throw out the adrenaline, pour it out now, because we've got to meet this crisis. And so we've trained ourselves and created these pathways in our brain. And so when the thing comes up, we don't even need to think about it. We're immediately reacting to it. And the brain is just taking over. The way I like to say this is, you have a certain way you drive to work, for instance. And I used to drive down Jones, get on the 95 at Jones and 95, and then drive to work. Well, that would take me past the Meadows Mall every day on the way to work, okay? So if we're looking at the brain as a roadmap, okay, my roadmap to work every day was driving there. But what happens is, on Saturday, I want to go to the mall, okay? And as I'm driving to the mall, all of a sudden I'm thinking about, oh my gosh, I forgot to do that at home when I left. And now my brain's consciously thinking about something else. So what do? I drive past the mall. Why? Because my unconscious brain is saying, oh, he's on to work again, So what happens is, those roadmaps have to be overcome. They have to be challenged, in essence, and then you start to make the effort on a daily basis to redo a roadmap. And going back to, where does it start? It starts all in the brain, with a portion of the brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. So all of these things that are attached to our emotions, positive, negative, they're all lodged there in the amygdala with all these emotional memories, and that's what's telling the brain how to react.
It's funny. I always talk about on-ramps and how are we going to get started. Jeff and I are in the crisis management business, and so we get these career-ending challenges that are handed to us, and that's the highest and best use of our time, in addition to the other things that we do. And so we have this crisis in front of us, and it has the potential to destroy a client, to run over their business. And within 10 or 15 minutes of sitting down with the client, we're happy as clams. We're doing the happy dance. Not only is there an agreement on how we're going to get paid, but we know the answers because we're not burdened by we know there's a way through this.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the problem with stress, because people see it as a problem. They do not think about there is a way out of this. One of the interesting things about stress is, when you look at it, stress is actually the fight or flight response that's in animals. We also have it in us, but it tends to be called the acute stress response. But it's the same response.
It starts in your blood and your...
Well, it starts right with the amygdala picking up something in the environment that says, look out.
Danger,
like
danger.
for the zebra, it's a lion. And so, the zebra needs to know to run. Well, that system also works in us, except for now it's not just about when we become scared. or when there's a crisis and we panic, what are we going to do? It also has to do with all of our emotions, whether it's anger, anxiousness, stress, disappointment, impatience. All of these emotions work out of that same system. And that's where the starting point to learn how to control your life, control your emotions, really begins in learning that this is nothing more than a process that's taking place in your brain.
I was with a client and I suspected that much of the problem that he was going through was self-generated, that it was from him. And it just happened that we happened to get into his car to go to lunch right in the middle of it. And in the first 10 minutes, he swore death and destruction on 15 different people. I said, I think I see a pattern.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the anticipation that something's going to go wrong, not something going wrong at all, that just drives you batty.
Epictetus, in the 1st century, a Greek philosopher, said, it's not the anxiety that's troubling man. It's not that problem that's out there that's really the problem. He's saying it's the man's thoughts about the problem that's really creating the problem for the man. It's how he's thinking about that. And the interesting thing, and both of you and I have too, experienced those times where we thought the worst thing in our life was going to happen at the end of the week. We have imagined every bad scenario there is, and we're just waiting for the axe to drop, right? And all of a sudden, nothing happens. So what do? We wasted all this time, all this energy, emotional energy, all this energy over something that never took place, all because we were up in our heads the whole time.
Building up stress levels, meanwhile, the whole time.
Increasing it like
Cycling
crazy.
up, I know.
And that's where the health problems start to develop, is because if you don't turn off the adrenaline, and even more so the cortisol, because the cortisol is important, is the cortisol when the fight or flight response kicks in, the cortisol goes into your system to lower certain responses. One of the things it lowers is your immune system. So if you have this stress level, and anger too, I mean, you've seen angry people, right? Not just I'm angry about this, but people who tend to kind of be angry all the time or right on the verge of getting angry. Well, when that's turned on all the time, that cortisol is suppressing the immune system. And when you suppress the immune system, even after the crisis is over, you're vulnerable to sickness.
Cortisol coursing through your veins never quite goes away. It leaves this great lining from which things like heart attack and stroke are formed.
Absolutely.
There was a great article in the New York Times in the last couple of weeks, and it was talking about immunity, your immune system and the way that it works. And one of the things that it said is your body's, this master, this martial artist of just destroying these diseases that come on. But if you're on the plains of the Serengeti and you're being chased by a lion, your body says, well, let's not worry about the possibility of infection here. Let's worry about those razor sharp teeth ripping your head off.
Absolutely.
So it completely shuts down your immune system, first things first, and focus on the stress. And next thing you know, old Jed's not a millionaire, old Jed's dead.
The guy who did, I recall the name now, the guy who did the video was the main star of the video, Stress Portrait of a Killer, was Sapolsky. He's out of University of California, and he wrote a book which I think has a great title, which is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. and the whole point is, see, when the zebra is out of the crisis, that whole system shuts off, and that zebra is back to a normal state. The problem with us human beings is we're not coming back to that normal state that we should be in. And so that continual leakage is causing the problems.
I have a friend, a very, very dear friend. She's a professional. She's very good at what she does. And she's at that fork in the road where she could very well use the time and energy, the education that she has to form her own business.
Right.
But because of her worldview, the way that she deals with problems, I said, don't go into business. You'll kill yourself. What is it that you would say to the young person? Imagine a young woman, 24, 25 years of age. These are the things, aside from running a business, these are the body things that you have to learn in order to be happy while you're going through it's going to happen, the ups and downs of the business cycle.
My approach in talking to her would, first I'd want to see if she is a person who tends to be more of a positive person, focus on the positive things in life. Does she tend to lean towards negative? Does she see the world in a negative view? Her attitude, does she tend to have that positive attitude all the time, or does the negativity kick in? Because I think that's going to determine a lot of how she's going to handle those different issues that are going to come up. Is you have to be a positive person, you have to have a positive attitude and a winning attitude, that all these things can be overcome. And that takes me back to this whole idea with stress. See, we don't have to be stressed out. We don't have to have the adrenaline flowing through us continually to solve that problem. All we have to do is to step back and say, you know what, I'm going to shut off the adrenaline and I'm going to focus on what I need to do. And we can still accomplish the same things without having to have all of the issues that come along with the adrenaline that goes with it. One of the interesting things too, just as I'm talking about that, the adrenaline doesn't just create the feelings inside of us. The fight or flight response also narrows your ability to look at options. You know, how many options does a zebra have? It's got one. Get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
You know, run for your life. And so when we're looking at these types of things, we have lots of options, you know, but people don't choose those options in learning how to say, okay, let me shut this off, let me focus on the problem, come up with solutions. Because if you do that, you've just expanded your ability to look at all of the options. Otherwise, you have a very narrow focus. And when you're in that state, you're going to stay there until things start to calm down.
What about various forms of meditation? Is that something you advise your clients to look into?
No, absolutely. One of the big things in our profession now is what's called mindfulness, which is trying to stay in the present moment, don't get focused on the past and all the issues.
That's tough to do sometimes for a lot of people.
It's very tough. But a lot of people live in the past or live in the future. But mindfulness is, no, you need to live in the present. And a lot of things that are coming in is the whole concept of meditation, is being able to free yourself out of all of the things, clear your mind, and have that time just to be able to focus back on yourself, what's going on in your life. And it's very big right now in the therapy community. You're seeing a lot of it.
I'll tell you one. Sam Lionel just turned 100, right?
100.
Just turned 100 years old. Still trying cases.
Oh,
And I've several times our paths have crossed. We're working with him on something right now. But a few years ago, when the old firm Lionel Sawyer and Collins was at the absolute apex of the legal community, I would be at social things and I'd see Sam, and I finally said, Sam, you have to have one of the most stressful jobs in Las Vegas. He's a managing partner. And every time I see you, you've got a smile on your face. What is the deal? And he said, meditation. Because there's never been a day I haven't meditated twice. So there's a lot to that.
absolutely, absolutely. And again, that comes to what can I do to start to take control of my emotions? Because it's not just the stress. It's like the anger we see in our society today. Everywhere you go, you know, you're seeing it in cars, just people driving, the way they're reacting. We're seeing it with a high level of mental health issues now coming out to the forefront, and people on medication. So you talk with somebody, and many people either have a family member or a friend, someone they know that's close that is on some type of mental health medication. So we're seeing this type of problem arising in our nation with all of these problems, where what we should be focusing on is, okay, what do we need to do now to be able to lower all of these emotions, and I call them high energy negative emotions, because that's really what they are. The high energy is the adrenaline once it's turned on. There's also the low energy negative emotions, depression and disappointment, discouragement, those types of things. But we have to have ways to be able to shut all of that stuff in our life and stay in control of it. And that's what I was trying to teach kids, especially with anger, because I'd have a lot of kids who were coming in on violent charges.
There's a poverty consciousness that goes along. There's not enough in the world. There's certainly not enough money for me. There's not going to be a job for me. There's not. And it has to be in the criminal justice system. That has to be the apex of poverty consciousness.
Right.
That had to be a tough time. Did you feel as if you had impact on those kids' lives?
Oh, there was a lot of kids that I saw the results, and that's the most rewarding thing in working in a job like in juvenile justice, where you see those kids get a hold of their life and move on. But what you would see is a lot of kids I actually worked in the area of Pecos and just off Bonanza, Pecos, Bonanza, Stewart, and all the way up to Hollywood. So you have an area that's largely Hispanic and unfortunately is a low income and even high poverty area. And so you would see the problems that was coming in with that. And unfortunately, you also see the crime that comes with that, stealing, robberies, other types of violence that are going on. And so that is a big issue that needs to be addressed, is how do we turn that whole situation around for these families? And one of the best things that we would find with kids is some of these kids, when they got a job, that was the end of their crime. All of a sudden, they're seeing that check, they're seeing that money, and they go, this is really cool. They were stopping drugs because they knew they were going to be drug tested. They were staying clean. They were staying out of crime. They were going to school. They were working. So that made a huge impact on turning their lives around.
A lot to be said for going to work at 8:30 in the morning every day, right on time again.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You see guys that go to prison. When I was a reporter in town here, I would see guys that were sentenced, anything from 5 years on to life, and they would say, 6 months, a year into their sentence, they would say, if I would have had this structure, I'd never be here. I would never be here. And all it was, swift kick in the ass and get up at 8:30, get off your rusty dusty and go make some money. Do it honestly.
And I think that's true with most of the kids, is that, especially today, is there's a lack of structure, and so the more structure you can provide, most of these kids will succeed. It's just unfortunate that they're not getting that structure they need.
Now, all of this led to a book. Tell us about your book.
So what I ended up doing is after I did the classes with the probation officers, because I could only do so many at a time, about 25 at a time. After I did all the classes, I ended up doing this whole teaching at a church. And at the church, they were going to give me 9 weeks to expand the whole concept, because they thought, okay, this is a good thing to bring in, because it's not just probation officers that need it. We all need it. We all need to learn how to take control of our life, our emotions, bad behavior, bad habits, addictions, whatever it is that's creating that lack of joy in our lives. What do we need to do? So I was asked to do that. And at that point, I was able to expand the book, expand the classes. And it was about halfway through there, I realized I had a book that would, I think, help a lot of people. I just didn't realize everything that was going to be involved in it.
There's the book, Take Control of Your Life. And that's available at Amazon?
Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, yeah. So, it was a great experience, too.
I just had a question about the role of all these social media platforms and the role that they play in so many people's modern lives. Specifically, this dynamic that so many people go out of the way to present a kind of a picture-perfect lifestyle that they present to the world on social media.
Right.
When in reality, many people's lives are much much different, much more difficult, a lot more ups and downs.
Complicated.
Is that something that you see affecting people's mental or psychological state, especially among young people, I think?
Well,
Maybe most susceptible to
social media is having a major impact on younger people. And there was an article I read that was very interesting, how teenage girls are developing depression if they're not included in the cycle of friends. And so they had a story of a girl who's sitting home on a Friday night and all of her friends are out partying and they're sending her pictures and texting how much fun it is. And she's feeling depressed because she's at home with her friends. So a lot of these kids, through social media, all this stuff, are comparing their life and what's happening with all of this other stuff that are just momentary shots that are here and there, and it's having a major impact on them.
Is that the biggest change you've seen in this field over your career, or is there another one that stands out?
That's a good question, actually. I think it's, right now, I think it's the most recent change that we see, because one of the things that probation officers had to start doing, and this is back before Facebook, they had a couple other little things, I forget what they were called, where you had that same type of interaction. And eventually Facebook, but the probation officers figured out real quick, they need to get on social media and figure out what the kids are doing.
What's really going on? Yeah, they'll do it.
And they learned a lot quickly. But it has a major impact in kids' lives. I mean, all the way from just the normal interactions all the way up to the sexting that we see, which is very problematic among teenagers. Well, we even saw that it was problematic for a congressman.
I will say this. So I know the value of living in the moment, but I will say this. I was fortunate enough, I've done a number of IPOs, and I worked with some of the nation's real leaders in business people, Paul Nussbaum, Steve Ross. The one thing that I saw over and over and over again was not so much anxiety, but it was a focus on what's next, what happens tomorrow morning, what's the best that comes out of this meeting tomorrow morning. 1 week from now, where are we going? And it's so that their plate is full of hopefulness and a very systematic, disciplined approach for what comes next. And I always tried to emulate that.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, because what you're talking about is an approach to my profession. This is what I need to do to accomplish what I want to get to, versus being anxious about it, or what I call the normal state of anxiousness is constantly looking to the future, trying to predict what's going to happen. You cannot predict what's going to happen.
You can put your foot in it, but
right. But you can say, look, here's a path we can go down.
Yes.
Let's try this, and hoping that whatever happens today rolls over to tomorrow. I agree with that 100%.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. It's an interesting approach, and I hope people take a look at your book.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed this time together and the few minutes we had before we started meeting.
Thanks to our guest, Brad Garrett, sought-after speaker, author, trainer, licensed therapist, and life coach who teaches people how to take control of their lives, overcome life obstacles, difficult emotions, and problem behavior. Jeff Haney, Vice President of Fierro Communications, and for all of you out there who own businesses, have that entrepreneurial spirit in your heart, or care about someone who does, remember to like, share InBizLV Podcast on Facebook. You can also catch us on YouTube, iTunes, or Stitcher. If you know an interesting business story, you can reach us at Fierro Communications at 702-385-7300. Make it a great day. See you out there in the deal stream. We're out of here.